there's no change. I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me, baby. Not yet.
The security guard grabbed Simon Smith by the collar and dragged him across the polished marble floor like he was a bag of trash. "I told you once already," the guard said through his teeth. "Get out!" Simon's sneakers squeaked against the floor. His left shoe had a hole near the toe, and the cold from the lobby seeped straight through his sock. He didn't fight back. He'd learned a long time ago that fighting back only made things worse. "Please," Simon said. "I just need to see her. I can help." The guard shoved him through the revolving door so hard that Simon stumbled down the 3 stone steps outside and landed on his hands and knees on the sidewalk. His palms scraped against the concrete. Little dots of blood appeared on his skin. Behind him, the guard dusted off his hands and went back inside Dellington Tower like nothing happened. Miss Simon sat on the cold Chicago sidewalk and looked up at the building. 62 floors of glass and steel. The name Dellington was stamped across the top in gold letters so big you could see them from 3 blocks away. Inside that building, somewhere on one of those floors, a girl was dying. And Simon was the only one who could help. But nobody would listen to him, because Simon Smith was a 14-year-old kid from the South Side with holes in his shoes and nothing in his pockets. 3 weeks before all of this, Simon's life was simple and hard. He lived with his grandmother, Miss Ruthie, in a small apartment on 63rd Street. The hallway always smelled like somebody else's cooking, and the elevator had been broken since before Simon was born. They lived on the 5th floor. Miss Ruthie was 71 years old and still worked 2 jobs. And she cleaned offices downtown during the day and folded laundry at a hotel on Michigan Avenue at night. She never complained, not once. She just told Simon the same thing every morning before he left for school. "You got a gift, baby. Don't you ever let nobody tell you differently." Simon's gift was plants. He didn't know when it started exactly. Maybe when he was 5 or 6 and he found a dying rosebush behind their building. Everybody else walked past it. Simon stopped. He touched the brown, dry leaves, and something in his chest told him what was wrong. Not in words, more like a feeling. Like the plant was talking to him through his fingers. He brought water. He mixed in some sugar from Miss Ruthie's kitchen. He pulled off the dead leaves and whispered to it. Within 2 weeks, that rose bush was blooming bright red. So the neighbors thought somebody from the city had come and fixed it up. Nobody guessed it was the skinny kid from 5B. By the time Simon was 10, he had turned the empty lot next to their building into a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, collard greens. Herbs that smelled so good people would stop on the sidewalk and close their eyes. He grew things that shouldn't have been able to grow in that soil, in that weather, in that part of town. But they grew for Simon. By 12, he started reading about plants that could heal. He checked out every book the library had on herbal medicine. He read about roots and leaves and bark that people had used for thousands of years. He experimented. When Miss Ruthie's knees swelled up so bad she couldn't walk, Miss Simon made her a tea from turmeric root and ginger and something else he found growing wild along the train tracks. A golden-coloured weed that nobody paid attention to. Within 3 days, Miss Ruthie was back on her feet. "What did you put in that tea?" she asked him. "Just plants, Grandma." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, like she understood something she couldn't say out loud. By 14, people on the block knew about Simon. Not a lot of people, just the neighbourhood. Old Mr. Henderson came to him when his stomach wouldn't stop hurting. Mrs. Williams brought her daughter when the girl's skin broke out in a rash that no cream from the drugstore could fix. Simon would listen, think, go into his garden and come back with something. A paste, a tea, a leaf to chew on. It didn't always work. Simon was honest about that. He was still learning, but more often than not, it worked, and he never asked for a single dollar. "Boy, you're going to be a doctor one day," Mr. Henderson told him. Simon shook his head. "Doctors don't use plants, Mr. Henderson." "Then you'll be something better." Tim Dellington was worth $4 billion, He had made his money in real estate, buying up buildings all over Chicago and turning them into luxury condos and high-rise offices. Dellington Tower was his crown jewel. He lived on the top 3 floors with his daughter Anita. His wife had passed away when Anita was 6. Cancer. Tim had thrown money at the best doctors in the world, and none of them could save her. Now, 7 years later, it was happening again. Anita Dellington was 13 years old. She had her mother's smile, her mother's eyes, and now, her mother's sickness. But it wasn't cancer. The doctors couldn't figure out what it was. That was the problem. It started with headaches. Then fatigue was so heavy that Anita couldn't get out of bed. Her skin turned grey. Her hands shook. She lost weight until her clothes hung off her like they belonged to someone twice her size. Tim flew in specialists from New York, London, Tokyo. He spent millions. They ran every test. They tried every drug. Nothing worked. Some of them made her worse. Tim Dellington sat at his daughter's bedside and held her thin hand, and for the first time in his life, all his money felt useless. "Daddy," Anita whispered one night. Her voice was so small it barely reached his ears. "Am I going to die like Mama?" Tim couldn't answer. He just squeezed her hand and looked out the window at the city lights. 62 floors below. Chicago moved on without caring. Simon heard about Anita Dellington the way everybody else in Chicago did, on the news. The story was everywhere. Billionaire's daughter struck by mystery illness. The world's top doctors can't find a cure. Tim Dellington offers a $10 million reward for anyone who can save his child. $10 million. Simon didn't care about the money. He sat on his bed in his small room and watched the news clip on his cracked phone screen, and he felt something. That same feeling he got when he touched a sick plant. A pull in his chest. A knowing. He watched the interview with the doctors. They described her symptoms. The headaches, the grey skin, the shaking, weight loss, the way her body seemed to be shutting down from the inside, but they couldn't find a virus or bacteria or any known disease. Simon paused the video. He sat there for a long time, thinking. Then he got up and went to his garden. He walked through the rows slowly, touching leaves, crouching down to smell the soil. He stopped at a plant in the far corner. It was something he'd been growing for almost a year now. He'd found the seeds in an old book from the library, a book about traditional African medicine that was so old the pages were yellow and crumbling. The plant had dark green leaves with silver veins, and when you crushed a leaf between your fingers, it smelled like rain. Simon had never found a use for it. Until now. He stood there in his garden with the cold Chicago wind biting his neck, and he knew. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew. The first time Simon went to Dellington Tower, he walked through the front door like he belonged there. He got about 10 steps inside before the security guard stopped him. "Where do you think you're going?" Simon stood straight. "I'm here to see Mr. Dellington, about his daughter. I think I can help." The guard looked at Simon. I looked at his old jacket, his worn-out shoes. His backpack was held together with duct tape. The guard didn't even try to hide his expression. "Kid, get out of here." "But Now." Simon left. He came back the next day. Different guard, same result. The day after that, he tried a side entrance. A woman at a desk called security, and they walked him out. The fourth day, he wrote a letter. He explained everything. His experience with plants. What he thought might be wrong with Anita. What he thought might help. He put the letter in an envelope and gave it to the front desk with Anita's name on it. He watched through the glass doors as the receptionist looked at the envelope, looked at Simon, and dropped it in the trash can under her desk. That was the day the guard grabbed him by the collar and threw him out onto the sidewalk. Simon went home that night with scraped palms and a bruised knee. Miss Ruthie saw the scrapes and her face went hard. "Who did this to you?" Simon told her. He told her everything. About Anita Dellington. About the plant. About knowing he could help. About how nobody would let him through the door. Miss Ruthie listened. She didn't interrupt. When he was done, she sat down in her chair by the window and was quiet for a long time. "You sure?" she finally asked. "Are you sure you can help that girl?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we'll find a way." The way came through a woman named Denise Carter. Denise was a nurse who worked at the building where Miss Ruthie cleaned offices. They'd been friendly for years, talking during breaks, sharing stories. Denise happened to mention one evening that her cousin was on the housekeeping staff at Dellington Tower. Miss Ruthie almost dropped her mop. "Your cousin works there? In the building?" "Yeah, why?" Miss Ruthie told her about Simon. Denise listened with her arms crossed, looking doubtful at first. But Miss Ruthie had known Denise for 8 years, and Denise had seen what Simon's tea did for Miss Ruthie's knees. She'd tried it herself when her back was acting up. "I'm not saying he's magic," Miss Ruthie said. "I'm saying he knows things about plants that grown doctors don't know. And that girl is dying, Denise. If there's even a chance—" Denise made a phone call. Her cousin, a woman named Patrice, was nervous. She could lose her job. But she agreed to get Simon inside, just once, just for a few minutes. It happened on a Thursday night at 11 o'clock. Patrice met Simon at the service entrance on the backside of Dellington Tower. She looked scared. Simon was carrying his backpack with the plant inside, wrapped in a damp cloth. "You got 15 minutes, Patrice whispered. "Mr. Dellington's in his office at 60. Anita's room is on 61. There's a night nurse, but she takes a break at 11. We are going now." They took the service elevator. Simon's heart was pounding so loud he was sure Patrice could hear it. The elevator climbed and climbed, and when the doors opened on the 61st floor, Simon stepped into a world he'd never seen before. The hallway was wide enough to park a car in. The carpet was so soft his feet sank into it. There were paintings on the walls that probably cost more than his entire building. The air smelled clean and sweet, like someone had filtered it through flowers. Patrice led him quickly down the hall to a door that was slightly open. She pointed at it and backed away. 15 minutes, she said again, and disappeared. Simon pushed the door open. The room was big and dim. Machines beeped softly. There were monitors and tubes and an IV stand next to the bed. And in the bed, looking so small she could have been a doll, was Anita Dellington. Her skin was grey, just like they said on the news. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow and rough. Simon could see the veins in her hands, dark against her pale skin. He moved closer. He stood next to her bed and looked at her for a moment. Then he closed his eyes and placed his hand gently on hers. The feeling hit him like a wave. It was the same thing he felt with his plants, but stronger. So much stronger. He could feel her body struggling. He could feel something wrong, deep inside, like a plant that had been poisoned from the roots. He opened his backpack and pulled out what he'd brought. The plant with the dark green leaves and silver veins. He had prepared it that afternoon. Crushed the leaves into a paste, mixed it with honey and warm water to make a tea. He poured it from a small jar into a cup he'd brought from home. He lifted Anita's head gently and brought the cup to her lips. She was barely conscious, but her lips parted and she swallowed. 1 sip, 2 sips, 3. Simon set her head back down on the pillow. He placed a single fresh leaf on her chest, right over her heart. He didn't know why. He just knew. He was standing there with his eyes closed and his hand on her forehead when the door slammed open and the lights came on. Tim Dellington stood in the doorway. Behind him were 2 security guards and the night nurse. "What the hell is going on?" Tim shouted. The guards rushed in and grabbed Simon. They pulled him away from the bed so hard his backpack fell to the floor and the jar of tea shattered. "He's the kid from downstairs," one of the guards said. "The one who kept coming around. I don't know how he got up here." Tim looked at Simon with eyes full of anger and fear. "What did you give her? What did you do to my daughter?" "It's medicine," Simon said. His voice was calm, even though the guards were gripping his arms so tight it hurt. From a plant. It's going to help her. Call the police, Tim said, and get the doctors up here now. If he poisoned her... I didn't poison her. I'm trying to save her. Tim stepped closer. He looked down at Simon, this skinny 14-year-old kid with duct tape on his backpack and a hole in his shoe, and his lip curled. You? Save her? The best doctors in the world can't help my daughter, and you think you, some kid from the streets, you have the answer? Simon looked Tim Dellington straight in the eyes. Yes, sir, I do. Tim turned away. Get him out and find out how he got in. The guards dragged Simon out. Downstairs, the police were called. Simon spent 2 hours in a police station before Miss Ruthie came and got him. No charges were filed because there was no evidence he'd hurt anyone. But Tim Dellington's lawyers sent a message through the police. If Simon Smith came near Dellington Tower again, he'd be arrested for trespassing. Simon went home and waited. He sat in his room and looked out of the window at the garden below and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe for the news to say Anita had died, and then he'd carry that weight for the rest of his life. 2 days passed. On the third morning, Simon's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Is this Simon Smith? A man's voice asked. Yes? This is Dr. Reginald Harper. I'm the lead physician for Anita Dellington. I need you to tell me exactly what you gave her. Simon's chest tightened. Is she okay? There was a pause. Then, she's improving. For the first time in 4 months, her vitals are moving in the right direction. Her color is coming back. She ate breakfast this morning. The tests we ran show that whatever was attacking her system is retreating. We need to know what was in that tea. Simon sat down on his bed. His hands were shaking. It's a plant, he said. I can bring you more. They didn't send a car for him. No one came to the door. Dr. Harper gave Simon an address, a medical office on the north side, and Simon took 2 buses to get there. When he arrived, Dr. Harper was waiting. He was a tall, serious man with glasses and a white coat. He looked at Simon the way everyone looked at Simon at first, with doubt. Simon opened his backpack and took out the plant. He explained what it was, where he'd found the seeds, how he'd grown it, what he'd read about it in the old book. Dr. Harper listened, took notes, and sent the plant to a lab. The lab results came back in 48 hours. The plant contained compounds that none of the scientists had seen before. Compounds that seemed to target the exact type of cellular breakdown that was killing Anita. It wasn't a miracle. It was science. Science that hadn't been discovered yet by modern medicine, but that had lived for centuries in the traditions of people that the world had forgotten. Dr. Harper called Tim Dellington with the results. Tim was silent for a long time. Bring the boy to me, he finally said. This time, when Simon walked into Dellington Tower, nobody grabbed him by the collar. Nobody told him to get out. The same guard who had thrown him onto the sidewalk now held the door open for him. The man wouldn't look Simon in the eye. Simon was taken up to the 62nd floor in a private elevator. Tim Dellington was standing in his living room, which had floor-to-ceiling windows that showed all of Chicago spread out below. The lake, the skyline, the neighborhoods, everything Tim Dellington owned, and everything he didn't. Tim looked at Simon for a long time without speaking. His eyes were red. He hadn't been sleeping. They told me you came 4 times, Tim said. They told me you wrote a letter, and every time we threw you out. Simon said nothing. If we had listened to you the first time, Tim said, his voice breaking, she wouldn't have suffered those extra weeks. She's getting better now, Simon said. That's what matters. Tim sat down heavily on a leather couch that cost more than everything in Simon's apartment combined. He put his head in his hands. Why? He asked. You don't know us. You don't know my daughter. Why did you keep coming back? Simon thought about it. Because she was sick, and I could help. That's enough reason. Over the next 2 weeks, Simon visited Anita every day. He brought fresh batches of the tea, He prepared different strengths as she got stronger. He sat by her bed and they talked. She was quiet at first, tired and shy. But slowly, she opened up. "You really grew that plant yourself?" she asked one afternoon. "In a lot behind my building. It's not much, but things grow there. Can you teach me? When will I'm better?" Simon smiled. "Yeah, I can teach you." Anita smiled back. It was the first time she'd smiled in months. Now, here is the part of the story where things changed. Not just for Simon, but for everybody who had looked at him and seen nothing. Tim Dellington held a press conference. So every news camera in Chicago was there, and some from around the country. Tim stood at a podium with his daughter beside him, standing, breathing, alive. And he told the world what happened. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told them about Simon coming to the building. He told them about the guards throwing him out. He told them about the letter in the trash. He told them about finding Simon at Anita's bedside and having him removed by security. And he told them how that same boy, that same kid everyone dismissed, had saved his daughter's life when no one else could. Then he brought Simon to the podium. Simon stood there in his best shirt, which was really just his cleanest shirt, and looked out at all those cameras and lights. Miss Ruthie was in the front row, crying and trying not to. "I don't have a speech," Simon said. "Mum, I just want people to know that it doesn't matter where you come from. If you know something is right, you don't stop. Even when they throw you out. Even when they don't believe you. You keep going." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. Then they were on their feet. Tim Dellington did something nobody expected. He didn't just write Simon a check for the $10 million reward, though he did that too. He set up a foundation, the Simon Smith Foundation for Plant-Based Medicine. He funded a full laboratory, hired researchers, and put Simon at the center of it. Not as a mascot, not as a feel-good story, as a partner. He also bought the empty lot next to Simon's building, cleared it, and built a proper greenhouse and community garden. A real one. And with irrigation and lighting and everything Simon needed to keep growing. He paid off Miss Ruthie's apartment. Then he bought her a house. Nothing crazy. A 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood on the south side with a yard where Simon could plant whatever he wanted. Miss Ruthie stood in the kitchen of that house and cried so hard she had to sit down. "You earned this, baby," she told Simon. "Every bit of it." The $10 million went into a trust fund for Simon's education and future. Simon didn't touch it. He didn't need to. What he needed was already growing in the soil. But the revenge, the real revenge, wasn't the money. It wasn't the foundation, or the house, or the press conference. The revenge was quiet. It happened in small moments that most people never saw. It was the security guard who had thrown Simon onto the sidewalk. The man showed up at the community garden one Saturday morning. He stood at the gate for 20 minutes before Simon noticed him. The man's name was Gerald. He had a daughter Simon's age. He stood there with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the ground. "I'm sorry," Gerald said. "I was wrong." Simon handed him a pair of gardening gloves. "You ever grown tomatoes?" Gerald looked up. "What?" "Tomatoes. They're easy to start with. Come on." That was the revenge, not anger, not punishment, but making Gerald stand in the same dirt Simon stood in and realize that the kid he had thrown away was the one handing him something to grow. It was the receptionist who had thrown his letter in the trash. She sent Simon an email through the foundation's website. A long email, full of apology. She said she hadn't even opened the envelope. She said she was ashamed. Simon wrote back one line. "I hope you'll read the next letter that comes from someone you don't expect." It was Dr. Harper, who had doubted Simon at first, now standing in front of medical conferences around the world talking about the compounds in Simon's plant. When reporters asked where the discovery came from, Dr. Harper didn't take credit. He said, "A 14-year-old kid from the south side of Chicago grew it in a vacant lot. And he knew what it could do before any of us did." It was Tim Dellington, one of the richest men in the country, sitting on an overturned bucket in Simon's greenhouse on a Wednesday afternoon, asking Simon to explain how plants talk to each other through their roots. Tim, who owned buildings worth hundreds of millions of dollars, listening to a kid with dirt under his fingernails like he was the most important person in the room. Because he was. Anita recovered fully. By the next spring, she was back in school, back on her feet, and spending every weekend at Simon's garden. She was terrible at gardening at first. She overwatered everything. She pulled up plants thinking they were weeds. Simon was patient. He showed her how to listen to the soil, how to feel what a plant needed. "You really talk to them?" she asked once, watching Simon whisper to a row of seedlings. "I don't know if they understand the words," Simon said, "but they understand the attention." Anita kneeled down next to him and whispered to a seedling. Nothing happened, of course. She laughed. Simon laughed too. "Keep trying," he said. "It took me years." They became friends. Real friends. Not the kind that exists because of money or guilt or news cameras. The kind that exists because two people see each other clearly. She saw the boy who wouldn't quit. He saw the girl who wanted to learn. That was enough. The last part of this story isn't about Simon becoming famous or rich or winning any award. He did all those things eventually, but that's not the point. The point is what happened on a Tuesday evening in October, almost a year after everything. Simon was walking home from the garden. The sun was going down, turning the sky orange and purple over the south side. He passed the spot on the sidewalk outside Dellington Tower, where he'd landed on his hands and knees that day. The scrapes had healed a long time ago, but he still remembered the sting. He stopped and looked at that spot. Then he looked up at the building. 62 floors, gold letters, all that glass reflecting the sunset. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel bitterness. He felt something else. Something he couldn't quite name. It was close to pride, but deeper. It was the feeling of knowing that he had been right, that he had known something true, and he had held on to it even when the whole world told him to let go. Simon kept walking. He had seeds to plant in the morning. There were always more seeds to plant. Behind him, the city stretched out in every direction. Millions of people, all of them carrying something, a gift, a dream, a knowing that somebody else might throw away. Simon had learned the most important thing a person can learn. Never let them.